The people you're working with someday might be your boss, might be your customer, and you need to be strategic and intentional about these relationships. And you don't have to talk to all your customers, but who are your best customers and who are your repeat customers, and spend time with them.
If you're doing everything to empower people along the way, you stepping back does more for them to build belief in themselves. That's how you influence and multiply and duplicate yourself. Then you don't have to continue to do the things when you want to go do other things.
80 to 90% of Accenture customers are repeat customers. Well, why is that? Because success breeds success. People love to be successful. They like to work with someone they can trust.
Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof podcast with me, your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I am joined by Brad Englert. Brad is an author, a speaker, founder of the Brad Englert Advisory. He was a partner at Accenture. He's worked in academia, more on the administrative side, all of those places. Brad, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I see in the background your book, Spheres of Influence, which I just have loved and enjoyed. And partly, like, kind of the first question is all about relationships. And I want to hear from you, like, why do you believe relationships are the single most important thing in someone's life?
Well, the inspiration for the book came from what I learned at Accenture, the firm. I was with them for 22 years. And the first day on the job, they said, the people you're working with someday might be your boss, might be your customer, might be a peer of yours. And sure enough, 28 years later from that day one, a fellow I started with became the chief information officer of a very large organization. The same year, I became a chief information officer of the University of Texas at Austin. It's just amazing. And I, of course, still stay in touch with him. So these are relationships that last years and decades. And what I found is that you need to be strategic and intentional about these relationships. And you don't have to talk to all your customers, but who are your best customers and who are your repeat customers, and spend time with them. Because, it's a lot cheaper to sell to your existing customer than to go to a new customer.
You mentioned this as you and I were kind of just chatting, get to know each other a little bit, is that, this is the stuff that's never taught in business school. And why do you think that is?
I think it's really a blind spot. Yeah, they do talk about networking, but it's so superficial and so transactional. And, I'm hanging around the university. I, gave talks at the business school and stuff. It's just not in the curriculum. And it's so important. And frankly, it's more rewarding.
Oh, yeah.
I've been to networking events for 40 years. And you know how many customers I got out of those events?
How many?
Zero.
Yeah.
And, I get a stack of business cards. And I actually, after one event, someone called me a week later and asked me for a donation to their not-for-profit. It's like, I don't even know you. No.
Yeah. It's something that I think I picked up along the way. And for me, the idea of networking at some point just became to kind of feel icky. And I have a friend who does a good 2 or 3 minutes on networking compared to connecting. That's Brad Lomenick. And, he talks about kind of networking is all for me, whereas connecting is for others. And I think as you write about in your book, Spheres of Influence, it's all about practicing connecting within an organization. And to me, it's really kind of like a farmer mentality of I'm just going to plant as many seeds as I can and I'll harvest whatever comes up.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
As you worked at Accenture, as you've worked in other businesses, where do you feel was the drive in business school maybe that told people, hey, go focus on you, go be the hunter rather than the farmer? Where did you see maybe that ideology where like, man, I got to be different?
And there's nothing wrong with, being a hunter, but I think for longevity, being a farmer is going to last longer and be more rewarding. And, just it's not that hard. It's a learned skill. You don't have to be born with the ability. And,
Yeah.
when I got to the university, I my first job was to meet with my boss, of course, and meet with my direct reports, meet with my customers, and more as important, my peers and influencers. And I went out there and I said, "What are your goals and aspirations? What are you trying to achieve?" You got to know that, because how can I help you if I don't know that? And I have a couple of phrases in the book. Use your words. So if you're the boss, tell your people what you want. And then the other is, we're not mind readers. So your people can't read your mind. So you got to use your words. And second principle that is true in all the relationships is set and manage expectations. And I was really bad at that earlier in my career. I didn't know how to say whoa. I just said yes to everything. And later in my career, I got much better at managing expectations. And then third is
What brought about that change?
Oh, great story. So I read a book called Managing Expectations and written by Naomi Carton. And in there, she's a psychologist who worked in IT. So she has some psychology principles. And one was just say whoa. Don't say no, say whoa. So I had this type A personality partner with my boss, and everything she said was urgent, urgent, urgent. So one night, I'm trying to leave the office, have dinner with my wife, and literally at 5 o'clock, the phone rings, and it's her. "Brad, I need a white paper, a white paper." And I was scared, but I literally said, "Whoa, when do you need this white paper?" And she goes, "Oh, let me check my calendar. I need it in 2 weeks."
Oh, okay.
Oh, how many pages do you want this white paper to be? 3 pages. I was thinking 10.
Easy.
Do you have an example of a white paper that I could look at? Oh, yeah, that's David. I did one 10 years ago on XYZ Corp. Well, guess what? I went home and had dinner with my wife. Now, before I learned to say whoa, I would have called her and canceled dinner, upsetting her and me. I would have stayed up all night and delivered a 10-page paper the next day and get yelled at. And after that one experience, I never missed a vacation. I never missed going to training. I never missed going to the school play. I never missed going to the doctor because I was much better at setting and managing those expectations.
What in that book empowered you to kind of, I don't want to say stand up for yourself, but in some ways it was really that. It was asking questions like you just displayed you asked her. But to me, there's almost like an agency like, hey, I'm a human. You stand up for myself.
And even better, it gives you some mental space and time to actually understand what is being asked. And so when I was the boss, I was very thoughtful about when I asked someone to do something, we would talk about when can it be done? How can it be, we would negotiate it and not just bark the order. And then they're like, well, do I stay up all night or not? I hired a director who inherited this big implementation project. And first week, we're doing our one-on-one, and I go to his office. I don't make them come to me. I go out and go see my people where they work so their teams can see me. But he was nervous, and he goes, "I know this was promised to be done next summer, but I don't see any way it can be done by next summer with quality." And I said, "You know what? It's taken us 40 years to get this way. What's another month or two? Why don't you sit down and with your team and just come up with a plan?" And we want to deliver with quality.
Now, I know you have 3 principles, and you were just about to your 3rd principle, so I'd love
Oh,
to
I'm
hear that
sorry.
and continue the conversation. Yeah, no, I cut you off. I wanted to
Uh,
hear about your great story, which we got. So,
yeah. Genuinely care about their success. So when I got to the university, I met with this professor who I'd worked with 15 years earlier on a statewide network, um, electrical engineer. He'd been there 40 years, kind of a crusty guy. And I said, okay, give me some advice. He goes, get out of the office and tell people you give a damn. And that was the best advice because I needed to get out and talk to my customers. I needed to talk to my peers. And otherwise, I wouldn't know how to support them. So let's take an example. The campus has 54,000 students, 4,000 faculty, 21,000 staff. So it's a big place. The VP for public safety is a peer of mine. And I met with him and I said, it's not a matter of if something will go wrong, it's when it goes wrong and how we work together to address it. And he and I became fast friends. He actually went to the Ohio State University, which was one of my clients. And I loved the university and we just bonded immediately. And he and I would meet once a month and talk about what's coming up, commencement, 103,000 people in the football stadium every other week in the fall.
yeah.
And then we would talk about our procedures. So when something went wrong, we had a standing procedure. And so the bomb scare happened. I'm out on the mall with just my phone. They won't let me in the building because we're not sure where the bomb is. But we had a standard procedure where my team would get on the conference call, his team would get on the conference bridge, connected to the executives, and we worked the bomb scare from the mall. And we just, once a year, we'd get together, both our teams, our leaders, and we would do tabletop exercises of what happens if there's a hurricane? What happens if there's an ice storm? Cybersecurity. What if the power goes out? Well, we generate our own power. One day, like after that, the power went out and the switch over to the backup utility failed. We had no power. Well, that's why you have copper telephone lines in your emergency operations center because you don't have a network. But we prepared for that. We prepared for the unexpected.
To me, what I hear from you there is you prepared for all of that through relationships.
Right, exactly.
It was fostering the relationship that allowed you to be in the place to really be in either the mindset, the opinion, the connection, the ability to go back to your title spheres of influence, to be in that position to influence is because you prioritize the relationship.
And build trust. And you build trust over time. You don't do it. So I had a customer who was a great client. We were building a new financial system. I met with this executive director every month just to tell him, here's where we're headed. Here's how things are going, blah, blah, blah. And, great relationship. About 7, 8 months into it, we started falling behind. And I said, Jim, we need a little more help from your team. I'll get some more help from my team. And he literally spun around, picked up his phone, asked his guy, what do you need? You got it. And it was the quietest, most boring go live ever on the planet. It was, my team left early.
As you share that, and I think about circumstances that, I'm privy to, different relationships, different people. And one of the things that I gather there is, and I got this from you, the story you just told about the power outages, the mall, the bomb scare, all those things, is how essential it is in relationships. And, there's people that describe it differently, but are you willing to get in, quote unquote, the foxhole with people? Are you willing to get in and get your hands dirty? And I think there's an element, and I'd love for you to just kind of talk about your experience and how you saw it or how you trained people through it. It's like, oh, I can't get my hands dirty. That's not my job. As opposed to, I have 2 feet, 2 hands, whatever abilities I have, even if I'm in a wheelchair, I can do something. So I'm going to get in and do rather than throw it all on your desk and leave and then come back and say, well, why wasn't it done?
That's right. So I had a network of about 7 relationships that I worked. I asked all my direct reports to build their network with their peers. And a woman who worked for me read the manuscript. She said, Brad, you don't have my story in there. I said, well, what story is that? When you demanded I go out and meet with this person who hated us, I thought you were insane. And I went out and met with her once a month, and she hated us because of some past bad behaviors by the prior regime. And so we, of course, apologized for that and said, that's not how we want to work going forward. And after about 7 months, that critic became an advocate for us. And her boss, who hated us due to bad behavior, also became an advocate. And that wouldn't have happened if she stayed in her office all day.
As we're sitting here in 2025 and, 5 years removed from COVID and, how that affected the practice of building and managing relationships, whether in leadership or just in our world, take kind of a perspective as you're writing this book and as you've seen, how did that time period really, I would say underline the importance of doing the work to build relationships?
Well, the good news is you can do it virtually and in person. You don't have to be in person. When I was at Accenture, I had for 2 years, a team of 90 people, professionals all across North America. And we would go to different projects, different companies around the country. But we would get on a call every Friday, good old-fashioned conference call, and we would talk about what are the projects, how things are going, what could we be doing better, and what are some assignments that we could really stretch our staff, give them some stretch roles so they can grow. And then, of course, I did the same with the direct reports. What are your stretch goals?
Yeah.
And in addition, twice a year, we would meet in person, just so the whole team could know each other, know who each other were. And then I would go and throughout the year, what I call my Winnebago trips. And I would get in the metaphorical Winnebago and go to Benton Harbor, Michigan to visit the team at Whirlpool. I would go to Atlanta to meet my team at Bell South, New York City for Deutsche Bank. And I would meet with the client. I would ask for feedback, and then I would meet with my team, all levels. And I would really get to know them and where they wanted to get to in their career. And when we did the 360 reviews, all my staff at all levels loved the Winnebago trips.
Yeah.
And not just because I bought them dinner when I was there.
Yeah.
But, I was showing the flag and showing I cared.
Yeah. Is that something you learned, or did you just figure or modeled to you, or did you man, there's got to be a better way?
I kind of stumbled into it. I decided I needed to get out there. I always loved serving clients. So I do that where they are. And so that was part of my background. And how else could I get feedback from my clients if I'm never there? So I think that's how I kind of backed into it.
Yeah. I sense there, and as I realize in our conversation, there's very much a, as we talked about, the connection quality of and I've seen this firsthand. People are like, well, we're in a remote world. Oh, it's so hard. I'm like, well, go find a reason to be in person. And even if it's, I'm not even going to talk about work, I'm just going to go to dinner with you to find out what's going on in your life. That flight, that hotel, that dinner will be worth more than 75, whatever, quote unquote, other things that you could do that's not in person. That's what I've experienced. And I think you're telling me that in a time before COVID or now after COVID, that it's always been essential. I think it's more essential now that we find this hybrid or remote world.
Yeah, I'm disagree with everyone back to the office 5 days a week.
Yeah.
When I was with Accenture,
I think it's comical.
I was either at home in my home office or at a client. I didn't have an office.
Exactly.
I'm a partner. I have no office. I didn't want an office.
Yeah. That's what I think is comical about it is, having conversations with people is like, oh, it's so hard. We need to get back in the office. I'm like, dude, that's lazy. Because I worked in a consultant role. I was, traveling every day. I was, my boss was in an office 3 hours away. And that was 25 years ago. That was just normal. And, so we have this idea, oh, we can't do good work unless you're in the office. I'm like, don't tell salespeople that, because they've been forever out of the office, might not even have an office, and they can get it done. So how can some people make it work and you can't? That's a you problem.
Yeah. Well, and I got the opportunity to be on the other side of the table when I was at the university and work with vendors. And we spent tens of millions of dollars a year on IT stuff. And I had one vendor who only showed up once a year for the maintenance check, which was always 10% more than the prior year. I could never get their help when I needed it. They just didn't care about us. Now, we're one of the largest universities in the country, and they just didn't care. So I had a vice provost who hated that system, that software, and she wanted to change the way we teach. And she needed a tool that lectures could be recorded, and then we could have discussions in the classroom. Well, this legacy tool was so bad, the students hated it. It was clunky and slow. I could not securely connect email to it, which is ridiculous. It's the learning management system. So all the coursework for 54,000 students and 4,000 faculty, it's a big deal. But her organization and mine worked with students and faculty. We went to the marketplace. We evaluated 15 products, and one rose like cream to the top of the milk bottle. And it was in the cloud. It was standard based. It was secure, and it was forward facing. And it took us 2 years to make a transition because we're just so big. We're like an aircraft carrier. And our teams, hers and mine, worked together to help all the departments make the transition. The good news is the students and faculty loved the new tool, so it was a pull to that. And when we finished, 2 years later, we had a big celebration, et cetera. I actually had a funeral for the legacy vendor. We made a cake in the shape of a headstone, put our rest in peace on it. And
that's funny.
And the account rep never even saw it coming. He was so disinterested in us. They didn't even know we were replacing him. And I was so happy to fire him. And let me contrast that to the new company. The new company, the VP for sales would call me once a month for 2 years to make sure everything was okay. And he had a team on standby. You need anything, you tell us. Well, we did need some things. We needed to change some things because at our scale, and of course he knew if he made us happy, all the other big universities would follow. And this was 10 years ago. And that's exactly what happened. All these universities followed. And the VP for sales and I still communicate on LinkedIn. I mean, there's a trust there. There's a just that he cared was really important.
I think what that points to, and I forget which book I read this out of, but it was, do for one what you want to do for many. Because in the idea, if I could do that for you, if I can call you once a month, Brad, and say, all right, what are you going through? Well, I'm going to learn something either that's going really well that I can use as a sales tool, or I'm going to fix something before it becomes a headstone. And I think that's an element in relationships is trying to, it almost goes back to what you said earlier, is how do you build trust? And I'd love for you to kind of explain in your mind and as you've written it, how do you build trust? Because I can't help but think what that guy did was exactly that. But I want to hear it in your words and your experiences. How do you build trust?
He understood what our goals and aspirations were. He knew what our strategy was and how important this was to improve the delivery of education at scale. Two, he and I were good at setting and managing the expectations. So we didn't get crosswise. And he knew where we were headed. We knew where we were headed. Then he genuinely cared. And I genuinely cared for I wanted them to be successful because I needed them to be around for the next 20 years. But it's those three principles is how you do it.
Let me ask you this. Those are the principles to act in. And this is just a speculation. This is a conversation as you and I are just sitting here in our offices thinking about it. Why don't people? Why do you believe that people don't focus on relationships, don't do the things to build trust they either, like the guy that you talked about that just came in and, wanted to raise your fee each month and then he's gone to the next, doesn't care. Why do you think people fall into that mode of action?
Sometimes that's how they're rewarded. They're rewarded by the transaction. What they don't realize is that's not very sustainable. And I worked with this one sales team where they had a lot of transactions, but they lost half their customers each cycle. Well, that's a very expensive way to do business. So their boss wanted me to talk to his sales team about relationships. And so, well, what do you know about your customer? Well, they were deer in the headlights. They didn't know anything about their customer. And when we changed that culture, they became 70 to 80% retention. Well, guess what? That went right to the bottom line. And instead of having holes in the bucket with 50% turnover, they were able to keep the revenue and retain it. 80 to 90% of Accenture customers are repeat customers. Well, why is that? Because success breeds success. People love to be successful. They'd like to work with someone they can trust. We worked with all the, top Fortune 100 and all the, largest universities in the world. Mm-hmm. And that just, you want to work with them. And that can last for many, many years.
You mentioned earlier, especially when you were talking about the learning to say whoa and, learning to, I would say lead yourself differently, but then in essence, I guessing that had an impact of leading up in a different way. As we've talked about, as you've gone through your experiences, what other relationships that kind of led you to that path is like, ooh, for me to be a better leader for those that I lead, I need to lead myself in a better way. What other experiences kind of showed you that?
So remember I said I was bad at setting expectations early in my career? I said yes to many things. I didn't say whoa to understand. And I worked too much. And actually, kind of a mind experiment, I went through 22 years of annual reviews. I had them from Accenture, and I looked at how my partners were teaching me to be a better leader. And they told me, you're setting a bad example for your people. You don't need to work all the time. You need to set a better example for your people. And that was like, probably when I was a new manager. It's like early in my management time. And they sent me to training to, management school and stuff. But it was that you need to be a good role model. And they even said because it's important for you and your family as well as your staff.
How long did it take for that to sink in? How many years?
Probably, 3 till I got the coaching.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
It's something for, intensity has always been a crutch of mine. Intensity has been a crutch of, what I put on a wall to protect my insecurity. Am I good enough? Do I have value? Can I do? I'll just push my head through. I'll work. I'll do more. I'll do more. And one of the things that I've had to internalize, and as you say that, be a better example, is I had to learn how to get lazy. Meaning I had to learn how to slow down to be there with others. As I say that, and I can read it in your eyes, what does that mean to you when I say that I had to learn to get lazy?
It's a learned skill. I had to teach my direct reports how to take vacation, how to go to training. Oh, I'm too busy for training. No, you're not. That's Cubby, right? You're too busy to sharpen the saw. Sharpen the saw. So when I got to the university, I inherited kind of a fire drill culture. It was heroics were being rewarded, and they would swoop in and save the day, and which is opposite of my work style, which is proactive customer focus. So in the first 90 days, we talked to our customers, we talked to our staff, talked to my direct reports, what's working, what's not working. And then we articulated our values. And the number one value was family first. Well, why would we do that? I work in Austin, Texas. We have all the global technology firms here. I cannot compete on salary. But you know what I can compete on? An 8-hour workday and hybrid schedules.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a network engineer who resigned to go work for a startup here in town, and equity and all that. And I said, look, I don't say this to everybody, but if you don't like it, you can come back. 2 weeks later, we get the call. Can I come back? He got to the startup and he said, well, they feed me and do my dry cleaning because I never go home. And so here I thought I was helping my family and, economically, but I never see them. So I want to come back because you have a value of family first. And then the other values were transparency, consistency, collaboration, and you have to reinforce those in multimodal ways. So obviously on the website, we had an orientation that was mandatory. No one could get on the work floor without going through orientation, where we'd talk about the values and we'd bring in the leadership team and they would talk about all the things they're working on. And then we had quarterly meetings, both hybrid, online and in person, where we would talk about the values. We'd bring customers in and share stories. We'd give kudos to staff who were being successful. And I wrote a blog once a week for 8 years, and it's just short, 200 words, maybe 250, but they would be topics like, oh, here's some big things we're working on: new learning management system, voice over IP, new data center. Oh, kudos from this person and that person, from customers, unsolicited. They just told me. I'd talk about the values. And, I want you to go to the school play, go to the doctor. If you're sick, don't be a hero. I don't want you to come to work. And then, of course, I would model those behaviors. I learned long ago, if I just asked my direct reports to communicate to their teams, it wouldn't happen. You have to have multi ways to communicate the values and then demonstrate, take your vacation, go to the school play, actually walk the walk.
What you're sharing to me in a relationship world, focusing on connection over networking seems common sense. It does to me. You've experienced it. I grew to that understanding common sense because I saw also the bad side of it. But yet we are in a work world where you and I both know you have a advisory business because this is not common sense.
Right.
It isn't. And
Yeah.
when you talk about it, you go into somebody and they're like, for leadership training, it's like, well, we don't have time for it. Really? Really? You
Yeah.
would probably solve 75% of your difficult, conflicting issues
Right.
if you slowed down to just ask people, hey, how are your kids doing? Well, what are you excited about a vacation? Just those simple be human. Why do you think in our society, what's driving this race to an undefined destination, a line in the sand that we just can't get out of?
You need to learn how to do it. You need to be taught how to do it. And so just like I was saying yes to many things, you need to learn how to set and manage. I had a direct report, another one, a woman who read the manuscript. She goes, you know what you did for me is you made me slow down. And you made me, because I was rushing to the solution. And she's a brilliant woman. So she could get to A to Z in a nanosecond, but she'd leave out some of the letters in the middle. It's like, how about M, N, O?
Yeah. They're essential.
And I said, there's no rush here. It's like, we've been around since 1883.
So when you sit down and talk to those people, what do you think's driving the rush?
Well, part of it is personality. They have that
we continue to put that personality in that spot and applaud it.
Well, it's back to your intensity. They have an intensity and a drive, and sometimes that just overrides slowing down to better understand. Sometimes if you slow down, the problem solves itself. You don't have to
Part
rush.
of you going fast causes the problem. Let's get honest.
But it took me 7, 8, 9 months, and we finally changed the culture to a proactive, customer-focused. We had our network of 90 to 100 relationships, and every 4 to 6 weeks we're touching. It was like our nerve endings in the organization of 70,000 people. And 3 of 7 directors had to be replaced because they couldn't make the transition. But the new people coming in were proactive and customer focused, and that just shifted the culture.
Coming back to, like myself, coming to grips with it and realize this doesn't work anymore. And I see it. I think you talk about seeing it. You experienced it where you get to a point, it's like, oh, this just isn't working. And instead of trying to continue like bounce around corporate, oh, you're intense, you're type A, you're, very driven, great. And then you just burn bridges. It's scorched earth everywhere. It's really understanding that doesn't work.
That whole egocentric, draconian management style probably worked for the baby boomers like me years ago, but it doesn't work anymore. I mean, people don't.
Why do you think it worked then?
Oh, I think we're just grew up and that was in the culture. It was a top-down culture, and I think good news is I think management's become better and more collaborative because that's where the ideas are.
Do you think it was better because that's what got like instantaneous results?
Probably, and just the culture, the beatings will continue till morale improves type thing,
Yeah.
I mean, we're tough, whatever. But back to your point on, if you're that kind of manager, then your staff aren't making decisions anymore. And there's this classic IBM study from the 70s, the monkey on your back. And it's about this manager who his staff would keep giving him problems and he would take them. And he'd be working on the weekend, they're out golfing. And it's like, wait a minute, what's wrong? So he learned every time someone tried to give him a monkey, he'd take the monkey and hand it back to him. So this is your monkey, not my monkey. And I think I actually gave that article out to my direct reports and said, this is how I work.
Yeah.
I want you to, do the thinking. I'm a humble practitioner. I'm a team player. I need all the help I can get. So, yeah, I can't make all the decisions.
From this conversation, from what I've gathered, from what I've read from you, Brad, like your leadership style is very much in vogue today. I mean, that's the organizations I believe people want to be a part of, the communities, the relationship. We talk about such a lonely world we have today. I think we have a lonely world because we have leaders that are in their office with all these monkeys on their back and they're trying to do more because they're expected to do more instead of like, hey, I just need help. Let's do this together. And yet it's so interesting because you talk about generational. This is what hits me. Baby boomers, very large generation. You guys got to determine what the workforce is going to be like. Gen X, smaller. We don't have enough kind of like force to say, oh, it should be X, Y, and Z. Now Millennial and Gen Z say, I don't want all that pressure. I don't even know if I want to be in leadership because leaders who didn't act like you, I don't even trust them. And so we're probably seeing many organizations that don't want to change, that are being forced to change. And they're like, well, this is wrong. I'm like, nope, they're right. We just need to get with it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yep. And you used the word trust again. So that's key.
Well, I think that's one of our largest problems in society. In all arenas, whether we can talk political, we can talk organizational, we can talk peer-to-peer, is we aren't doing enough to appreciate people and their differences and what's alike, to build those relationships and connections to say, hey, you and I may be completely different politically, but guess what? We probably also have a lot of things that are the same. And let's hinge on that rather than, oh, I, don't agree with you politically, so therefore I'm a bad person. No, we need to get rid of that. Like, that doesn't help anyone.
So I had a client who we had 3 or 4 very successful projects, and we just loved working together, and our teams enjoyed working together. And about 20 years later, she calls me out of the blue and says, "Hey, Brad, my son is an attorney. He's moving to Austin. He's applying for a job at the university. Would you talk with him?" Well, I knew her son when he was 5 years old, a little 5-year blonde-haired kid. And so I said, of course, we haven't talked 20, of course I'll talk to him. So I talked with him and I said, look, university attorneys all share information. There's an association, find their website. They'll have all the issues listed there. When I created a contract with Google, my attorney got it from the University of California at Berkeley. We used their contract. So he studied those issues, and guess what? He got the job.
It's little things, and I think this goes back to the very start is, man, there's a time and place to hunt. Absolutely. But man, if you can embrace farming and really connecting and those fostering relationships, they will continue to serve you forever. And it really comes back to, I think, going through this world is valuing relationships because people are worth being valued. And I think that's what I hear in the spheres that you talk about is like, hey, value those relationships because in each of those areas, that's how you're going to be able to lead and influence people.
Well, and frankly, it's more rewarding. It's more fun.
Yeah. I mean, it's the, going back to the 80s movies is, the comment, the one that dies with the most toys still dies. And it's instead of like, share it with others, like
Right.
be on this journey to go together rather than, yeah, I got there first. Well, you're all alone.
I had a client who asked me to take over this large transformational project, and it was a big university in the Midwest, and it was in October, and I said, "Look, you have all the pieces to be successful here. I'd love to come help you. Sign me up." I'm having lunch with the provost and the chief financial officer, and we're at the faculty club. Very nice. And I said, "However, next June, I have a vacation scheduled for Australia. I was an exchange student. Last year was my 25th high school reunion. I canceled because of work. So my wife and I got the passports for the boys and us. We have the plane tickets. I really need to go for this 3-week vacation." They said, "Oh, sure, no problem. Yeah, okay." So we're in spring. Everything's going clickety clack, clickety clack. Things are good. We meet with the president in May. And Mr. President, just wanted to remind you, as I have the last 3 months, that I'll be going to Australia next month. And his hands started shaking.
Yeah.
And so I'm slow motioning, whoa, canceling my vacation. And the provost and CFO says, "Wait, Brad, wait, hold on. Mr. President, when Brad joined us in October, he talked about this vacation. It's important for him and his family. We should uphold our commitment to let him go. Diane's going to be in charge. He said it's a good time to go and she'll be fine." Okay. So went on vacation, didn't check email, didn't check voicemail. And 10 years later, I'm back in that Midwestern city having dinner with CFO, his spouse, and my wife. And we talked about that. And he goes, "Brad, when you were gone, the provost and I were scared to death." But they trusted that I wouldn't leave them in the lurch. But, they were nervous, but they trusted me. And that was pretty cool.
That was a lesson I learned years ago in our business where, we kind of went on a family vacation as well and stepped back. And one of the things that I learned from that is if you're doing everything to empower people along the way, you stepping back does more for them to build belief in themselves than you being there. And say there was a problem. I'm guessing there was some situation and they're like, we can't call Brad. He's on the other side of the world. We'll just have to deal with this. And then you get back and say, all right, well, maybe that isn't how I done it, but man, you made progress. Look how much you've learned. Or maybe, that's exactly how I did it. Either way, that empowerment to me is a better form of leadership because, that's how you influence and multiply and duplicate yourself. It comes back to one of the things you mentioned earlier that I had to learn too is if people walk into your office like, man, I can never do what Brad does, you've lost. You have lost. That is a ball and chain that will forever imprison you. But if they come, it's like, man, that Brad guy, I can do what he does. Dude, you've won. That is like success number one, because then you don't have to continue to do the things that when you want to go do other things.
One thing Accenture did as part of the culture of, emphasis on mentoring, coaching, and training all the way up. Even in my last year as a partner, I was teaching project management class in our training center. They gave us field promotions, stretch roles. And so when I was up for manager, they put me in a managerial role. And it was less risky, because I wasn't a manager. It was a learning experience. And they coached me through that. When I was up for associate partner, they put me in an associate partner role. I was acting just like an associate partner and delivered. And then same thing with partner level. And that's a way to avoid imposter syndrome. And that's a way to help your people, you know, stretch into the role. So at the university, one of my direct reports wanted to be a CIO someday. Okay. When I go on vacation, you're the interim CIO. she she became a CIO after she left the university at another university.
There's an element there that you're not really emphasizing that I think is imperative. And it gets back to a little bit of the state of organizations is you had to coach people and guide people. They weren't finished products. They didn't know how to do it. And I think, as I was on a coaching call this morning and someone brought up imposter syndrome, and I related to a book that Dave Dobson from Stanford wrote. And, it very much, he goes, there should be no such thing as imposter syndrome, because if I put you into the CIO role, I don't expect you to know how to do it because you've never done it before. That's a responsibility on me to help you, because that's part of it. And what have I done along the way to prepare you? But if all of a sudden you get the role today and you've never done it before, shame on me for expecting you to do everything perfect. There shouldn't be imposter syndrome, because that's how you grow and stretch into roles.
Right.
Brad, as we wrap up, as we get close to closing our time, where can people learn more about you, your book, your advisory business, your speaking business? Where can people learn more about that stuff?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. That's the easiest place to find me. I have a website, www.bradenglert.com, and I'm going to send you a link that you can put in the show notes.
Awesome.
That'll send your listeners to a free sample of the book, a tab how to buy the book, and a tab on how to schedule time on my calendar.
Perfect. Love it. Wonderful. Brad, thank you so much for your time. For all of you watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to get notified whenever we drop new content. As well, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you could do this, could you rate and review this episode? By doing that, more people will be able to find impactful leaders such as Brad. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.